Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to be talking with Megan King, who is releasing her book, which is called Designing the Modern World Language Classroom, How to Guide Students to Proficiency, and will be officially launching next week on the 13th. And we are incredibly grateful to also have Steve McCammon here. And I'm going to give you a little bit of their bios as well in just a second. But I'm Caroline Smith. I'm Chief Creative Officer of Tandem Light Press. We're a small press located right outside of Lawrenceville, Georgia. We have about 10 titles a year, and we focus mostly on empowering and inspiring titles by and for women. And this happens to be one of them. So we are very proud and very pleased to have Megan joining our sisterhood of authors. And we hope that she takes this a long way and that you guys get some amazing benefit out of this conversation that we're going to have today. So I'm going to introduce you to Megan, although most of you probably already know her. She's in her second decade teaching Spanish in Georgia public schools. Her classroom serves students across academic, economic, linguistic, and ethnic spectra. Her philosophy and practice are deeply shaped by the Schlechty Center, and its framework for design and engagement. And I also mentioned we had Steve McCammon here with us today, who is president and CEO of the Schlechty Center. He leads a team of professionals to stay focused on the core values and beliefs of the organization. In this capacity, Steve works closely with staff, network districts and schools, school boards, and educational partnerships to inspire organizations to think anew and to engage in the kinds of continuous innovation required to survive and thrive in our constantly changing environment, which could not be more true than it has been over the last several years. As an experienced superintendent, Steve understands what it means to be a moral and intellectual leader in a learning organization. He joined the center in 2013 after serving for 12 years as superintendent of schools in the Fife School District in Tacoma, Washington. So thank you both for being here today. Thank you to everyone that's on the call today. And we are going to jump right into this book. So Megan, tell us a little bit about what inspired you to write this book.
Well, I had been attending some professional development with some people from the Schlechty Center. One of those is on the call today, Anis is here with us. And as I went through the program, learning more about design, I'm really excited about how it applied to what I did in world languages. A lot of the literature that was out there was promoting like one right way to go about reaching students. And my experience was more that different students, different needs, different days. And what really excited me about the philosophy of design was acknowledging that all of those things are valid, and that the best way in my classroom is going to be the best way for my students, what fit their needs and what worked for them. So as I looked for other teachers doing what I was doing in my content area there, I didn't see a whole lot out there that I could model things on. And so as I began to kind of create my own language and understanding about how that fit with what I did, I realized that might be something that I could share with others too.
I love it. Now, tell me a little bit about what makes this book different in your view.
I think the biggest thing is probably just that, like I said, there's a lot of different one right ways to go about teaching world language depending on who you talk to. And I think what's different about my book is that it acknowledges the best parts of those ways, and kind of helps teachers see why those ways work differently for different students in different moments. So that, if we're talking about comprehensible input, which is one particular method of approaching foreign language teaching, we can look at that and say, here's why that method appeals to these kind of students or students for whom these design qualities are important, and make good choices about how we apply what might be billed as the one best method, and see those ways as stepping stones to a bigger goal of being able to reach all the learners in our room.
Excellent. Which is hugely important instead of just teaching to, one particular type of student in your class. All right, Dr. McCammon, I'm going to ask you to unmute. And can you tell us a little bit, since you are very proud of Megan, obviously, and you guys have, she's been so heavily influenced by the mission at the Schlechty Center. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it is that you guys do?
Sure. I'll give you the 30,000-foot view. We're a 35-year-old organization founded by Dr. Phil Schlechty. We're based in Louisville, Kentucky. And the best way that I can sum up what we're about is from the boardroom to the classroom, from the classroom to the boardroom. We help schools and school districts create capacity to focus on the main thing. And the main thing is whether or not students are engaged in their work. And we have workshops all over the country. We go in and work with schools, again, and school districts. And in this case, work with teachers such as Megan to really help them be reflective about their work, to really get to know their students and the motives they bring to their work. It's a really rewarding profession. We're not a program. And it's one of the things I loved about Megan's book was so much of what is written today is programmatic. It's about do this and this will happen. And I was just joyous in reading our founder, Phil Schlechty. He wrote engaging students the next level of what we call working on the work. And I think it was really, really nice to see an educator put to words how those principles and how that heuristic that he created along with our staff, how she really brought that into the practical application. So that's what we're about. Again, we're about a focus on engaging work for students and engaging staff.
Excellent. And we are very pleased and grateful that you contributed the foreword to Megan's book. In your reading of it, what points did you find most compelling for teachers becoming, and I'm going to quote you here in your foreword, leaders of engagement and designers for learning?
Yeah, we talk at the Schlechty Center about teachers as leaders and designers of engaging work. And sometimes we think teachers get pigeonholed into, sometimes they're asked to get kids ready for a test. Sometimes they're asked to be diagnosticians of all this data around them. And we don't talk enough about what we believe the principal role of the teacher is to be truly a designer. Teachers deserve that respect. And what I saw in Megan's book is what really makes it unique is she took those 10 design qualities, which provide a common language for teachers. She took those 10 design qualities and built her work around it. Really refreshing to see. I think what makes it unique, and my favorite part of the book is the chapter where she talks about, and the part where she talks about the importance of student voice. We all give a lot of lip service to the fact that, student voice matters and student motivation matters. But if you don't have a discipline for truly doing that, you're missing a golden opportunity. I was a classroom teacher. I wish I had had these design qualities. I think as a classroom teacher, and I think a fairly successful one, I think there were a lot more students that could have come a little closer to the fire and been really excited about their learning had I truly considered their motivations. Phil Schlechty always said, and Megan really talks well about this in her book, he said, all students bring a motivation to the classroom. It's really our job, and we should take it very seriously to figure out what that is, because every student deserves an equal opportunity to learn and be engaged in our classes. So I think it's unique in that way. It's unique in that she really puts the student at the front. The teacher is the leader and designer of engaging work, but it all begins with what the students need. And I said in my foreword, I'm impressed with the great care she took for students in this book, that it really is about what matters, and it's about the students.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to ask you, and you really just answered this, but in your view, what makes this book different than other books that you've seen?
Yeah, and again, I would say that it isn't in our organization, we talk a lot about that, learning from and not that. And I think Megan does a really nice job of saying, I'm not here to tell you how to do it. This isn't a prescription for, oh my goodness, if you'll do what I'm suggesting in the world language classroom, you will be successful and your students won't struggle. Her book is written more of a learn from what one teacher believes about what works in her classroom, and about how, if you apply this thinking about student motivation and about the power of differentiating instruction based upon what we call design qualities, I think that separates it out a little bit. There are a lot of books out there that tell you, if you'll just do this. I think if you go back and readers who will read this book, I think it's refreshing to say, here's a filter of how to think about student learning. Here's a filter to think about how teachers can think about their students in new and different ways. I think that makes it somewhat unique in what I've been reading.
I love the idea of it being a filter, meaning that you could change it out and use something different if that doesn't exactly work for your goals or your students at the time. Megan, can you talk a little bit about the philosophy of design in terms of how the teacher approaches certain methods? And you do discuss that a lot in your book. So can you discuss that as the basis for this book and what that means for students?
Sure. And before I get too far into that, I wanted to piggyback on something Mr. McCammon mentioned. A lot of times when we look at teacher or professional development, there's courses that are geared towards the thinking behind why we do things, either how students learn or how teachers should teach. And then there's things that target specific practices. You know, these are strategies for this, or these are tools for that, or here's a quick such and such activity that you can use. So one of the things that kind of guided how I approached the process for this book was I wanted my readers to understand where my thinking was coming from, but I also wanted them to have some very practical and tangible ways to apply it. So I made sure that there was not just here's what I think, but here's what you can walk away and do tomorrow. Here's an example of how this might look for your class. And beyond that, looking also at the end of each of the sections on design qualities, I have some questions for reflection, so that as teachers begin these dialogues to reconceive maybe how they've approached their understanding of student learning in the world language classroom, they can kind of have some action steps for what might this look like for them? How have they experienced this and not realized, and maybe not had the words to describe what they knew in their heart to be going on in the classroom, but not sure how to act on. So those things kind of drove my thoughts there. And the philosophy of design, like Mr. McCammon said, is really about approaching teaching as a way to get students to show up to the work on their own. A big tenet of the philosophy of design is that students are volunteers to their work. And just like any other situation where somebody is volunteering to do something, there's lots of different reasons people show up. There's lots of things that motivate them. There's lots of things that they want to get out of that experience. And the philosophy of design says, you know, what are those things that are going to make the student show up? And how can you incorporate those in the best way so that all of those students want to show up? And how can you conceive of work differently so that it's something of value and it's something of meaning for the students themselves? Because not every kid is going to like your content area. I mean, no matter what anybody teaches, not every kid that shows up in your classroom is going to be driven there solely by what you have to teach. As much as you might love that, there's lots of other reasons, though, that kids will show up. Maybe it's about who they get to work with. Maybe it's about some kind of product that's important to people they care about. Maybe it's about, you know, being able to use, for the case of language, for example, to learn more about pop culture through language. So there's the philosophy of design acknowledges that, you know, maybe the teacher isn't the most important person in the room, and maybe what we're doing should be geared towards those young minds that are showing up and helping them make their own connections to why what we're doing is meaningful.
Love it. I love it. I think we've all have had teachers who think they are the most important in the room and just enjoy having themselves speak. But I can tell already that is not the philosophy that you have in your classroom. So your expertise obviously is in Spanish, and you've been doing that for a long time. But tell me how this book might benefit either all world language teachers or even go a little bit farther into humanities teachers.
Well, I wanted to make sure that that because language teaching goes on honestly, it goes on all the time in every classroom because we use language nonstop, and especially in the educational environment, of course. The way that we communicate is part of the process of learning. But specifically geared towards world language, the world has lots and lots of languages, and even extending that into like English as a second language or a foreign language for students. But a way to think about how teachers, no matter what language they're teaching, can think about the work that they do differently and think differently about how to create the most engaging environment for students to learn language.
Excellent. So I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about, you mentioned a little bit about your process in writing, but tell me about your writing process and what that was like for you.
So I was so passionate. Like once I realized that that this was where my heart was, and trying to sort out what that meant for my classroom, I mean, the writing just flowed because I knew what I wanted, and I knew what my message was and what was important. So the writing part was the easiest part for me. The polishing after that, okay, how do I take it to print? How do I get the message out there? How do I, the technical details about how do I format this and what's the best way to share my message? That was probably the hardest part. And so I'm grateful to Tandem for helping me get those pieces in place.
And it's complicated. People think it's just going to be really easy to pull things together, right? And it's not as easy as it might seem, especially when you're doing, when you've created PowerPoints for a long time, that comes pretty seamlessly, pretty naturally. But then when you move into book form, where everything shifts as soon as you add a table and everything falls off the page and you're ready to tear your hair out. So we're happy to be able to help with things like that. And that was going to be my next question. Was there anything in the process that you struggled with, even in the writing and outside of kind of the formatting and technical aspects of it? Was there a part at any time in your writing process where you thought, I don't know what I'm saying right here, or anything that just didn't come as naturally to you?
Around the time that I had finished writing the bulk, that I was satisfied that I had gotten everything out that I needed to say. Then 2020 hit and the pandemic hit, and I thought, is my message still relevant? Like, is this still something that is going to be meaningful, 2, 4, 10 years from now? So I did some reflecting then about, let's say, and even in general, as the role of technology increases and changes and adapts to what we do in the classroom, just to kind of reflect on what would this look like in the digital realm. So at the end, I went back and added, what are some considerations if we are in that digital sphere as to how might the work look different for teachers and students in terms of how we design learning.
Well, and I appreciated that kind of digital addendum that you added to the end, because I think that, that's something that we're going to see so much more of, but it's also what makes it timeless in a way, that this is still going to have relevance in 5, 10, 15 years, hopefully, unless we're all walking around with like chips or something that Google has us on. So if you had to choose a moment of pure joy in the writing and publishing process, what would that be for you?
The most joy I had was probably my excitement at the beginning, like just that I was so convicted about the message and ready to share it. And then as time has gone on, probably the part that I have revised most frequently is the why at the beginning of the book. Why do you need this? And what is it exactly? Like, why? What are you going to talk about? And so my reflection on the introduction has probably been where I've put a whole lot of thought about, why do we need this? And is the why, and it's probably been, this book has been in the works for a number of years now, but as much time as has passed, my why persists. And I think it's it's a why that other teachers can relate to.
Excellent. So what would you do differently next time if you were to write another book? What would you do differently in the process?
I think probably what I would do differently, hindsight's 2020. So it's nice to look back and say, well, I should have probably checked into more about the publishing process itself, the nuts and bolts of what is it going to take? Because I have a lot of confidence that I can find the answers I'm looking for. But when it comes down to, there's some things that are in other people's wheelhouse. There's some things that other people do better than you. And that's valuable and important. So understanding more about the publishing process itself, what my options were, what I might be required to know and do to actually make, not just the words in my online file there, but words on a piece of paper and how to get that paper to the people that want to see it.
And would that be similar advice that you might give to someone who's looking to write their own book?
Absolutely. Probably the most important thing is a message that you feel that's important to share. Because I think a lot of people sort of have the concept of writing a book as maybe a goal in life, but they don't necessarily have a driving message. So finding that message for yourself is definitely an important first step, or at least it was for me. And then also, like we talked about, figuring out how the best way to share that message.
Do you have a favorite chapter? Dr. McCammon mentioned his favorite portions, but do you have a favorite chapter from your own book?
I do. So after the introduction, the next 10 chapters talk individually about what is this design quality, what does it mean, how does it look in the classroom, what are some sample activities that you can do for this. But just like my students, there's a particular design quality that I'm drawn to. I really like novelty. I like things to be new and fresh and exciting, and I want to do the next cool thing. And it was actually a lesson that I learned a lot about teaching through the voices of my students, because I was early in my career when I wanted to do all of the cool things. I got to a point where my students were saying, can we just please have some like guided notes? Can we do a fill in the blank? Can you just give us a study guide? And I was like, but we're playing like Black Op Review, and we're doing scavenger hunts outside, and I realized that even though that was exciting to me, it wasn't the structure that my students in that moment needed. So I enjoy this section on novelty because it's my favorite, but I think it's also important that I recognize that just like my students, I have preferences for teaching and learning, and that if I really want to be the best teacher for my students, I've got to put those to the side sometimes, and most of the time, and do what they need.
So you ask your readers to not only think creatively, but also to incorporate fun in the classroom. Near the end of the book, you also ask them to pose some critical questions during their careers. And I want to share just a few of those that you highlighted. So these questions are, what more could I do to reach those students who I have not engaged? Am I showing them every day that what they do matters? I think that's such a powerful introspective question for all of us to model to children, not just teachers, but parents and role models in general. So my question to both of you, Dr. McCammon, you can chime in on this as well, is with that in mind, what do you hope readers will walk away with when they close this book?
For me, a big subtext of my message is how do we give power back to our students, not just as learners, but as people in their own communities? Because a lot of times, being a student in and of itself is sometimes perceived as, you are under someone else's authority inherently, be it a teacher or a parent or and students have so much ability to create and to influence. I mean, we see them doing this in spheres like TikTok. So, we know that they have the ability to learn. We know they have the ability to create. We know they have the ability to be joyous and to influence others. So how do we tap into that in the classroom? Because we want learning to be something where they also experience joy. We want learning to be something where they can find influence with others in a positive and meaningful way. And so many students also are coming out of situations where, the simple act of living in your joy and of taking ownership of your learning and having autonomy and power to create and be productive may not be things that they have a whole lot of access to on a day-to-day basis. So I think it's critically important as educators that we create those opportunities for young people. And I hope that's a message that teachers also take out of my book.
And I would pick up right where Megan left off, tell a very quick little story about why I think, in the foreword I wrote that it was time for this book to be written. So many times we think that teachers coming out of the, there obviously is a crisis right now of classroom teachers, the availability of classroom teachers, young people going into the profession. And so I think even before that trend occurred, we really focused professional learning on the new teacher coming out into the classroom. And I think that's really important. But my story is about the value of Megan's book to all teachers, certainly not just world language teachers, but all teachers. I had one of the most gifted teachers I've ever known happened to be in my district out on the West Coast. And she was just a few years from retirement. We were having a design session where we brought in students and we captured their voice, and it was really a phenomenal experience. And this teacher said to me, she said, "Steve McCammon, I was the superintendent at the time. She said, "Steve McCammon, I'm really frustrated with you." And I said, "Well, why is that?" She said, "Well, would you agree that the biggest issue you've ever had with me as a classroom teacher," and it sounds like she was being cocky, but she was speaking truth. She said, "Probably the biggest issue you have with me is I've been around for my entire career here, and you have so many parents who want their children to be in my classroom." And I said, "That's absolutely right. We can only put 22 in, and we could easily put 50 in a year." But I said, "Why are you upset with me?" She said, "Because I have always felt that filing cabinet in my classroom has gotten me that reputation. It has shown folks that I'm a quality teacher. So when something works for most of my students and has garnered me that reputation, I filed it away and said, this will work again next year, and this will work again 5 years down the road." And she said, "What I realize in thinking about design and student motivation and the power of customizing learning, what I've learned is it's negligent to know that and not do that for all kids." And so she said, "I could coast into the last 3 years of my retirement, but now I feel the responsibility to take design more seriously." That's pretty powerful. And so I think if a teacher, young or a veteran teacher that's nearing the end of their career, reads this book and really thinks about the power of design and really thinks about the power of listening to student voice, I think that's a really powerful thing to have happen. And I wish they could hear Megan's excitement. This shows me this is the best of public educators. My goodness, the excitement is catching. And so the joy. So that's what I would hope people would bring away from the book, is to realize that more can be done. And that old saying of the greatest enemy of excellence is good enough. It's not good enough to have a filing cabinet full of lessons that work for most kids, because when you say most kids, you're excluding some kids, and you get one chance to be a fourth grader, and you get one chance to learn Spanish 101. Well, you can take several chances like I did, I guess. But that's what's powerful to me about this whole notion of design.
That's amazing. I love it. I do want to give an opportunity for some questions if we have them. Megan, it looks like you saw this, but I'm just going to share it for everyone else who may not have seen it in the chat. Lee Davis said, so kind of like a toolbox, building a toolbox that teachers can take from to create a high learning classroom. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to expand on that if you wanted. And if you'd like to also ask a question, please feel free to do it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask after Megan has answered this question.
I think to acknowledge, high learning absolutely. But I think also to acknowledge that we also want our classrooms to be places where students become more fulfilled in themselves and more empowered to be themselves. And I think that that's an important job. Part of our job as an educator is not just communicating content, but communicating personal growth as well. So.
Excellent. And if you do have a question, please go ahead and type it in the chat. But I do want to ask Megan, what's next for you?
What's next? I'd really love to be able to talk to more people about my philosophy of design in the classroom. Of course, specifically related to for world language teachers. I think having the opportunity to build communities around the philosophy of design and what it can do for students could be something really powerful. And I'm excited to see what might happen there.
Well, we hope that you continue to speak about this, because you're exactly right, Dr. McCammon, that I think her excitement about this is palpable, and that joy can ripple and expand into so many different areas. So we are so hopeful that you will have the opportunity to get up and create more communities throughout this. And I took German for 4 years. And I wish that my German teacher had this kind of philosophy of design in our classroom. But it's something that I know I'm now going to ask my children's teachers, like, what can we do about this? How can we be engaging them more? So I'm just so grateful that you allowed us the opportunity to work with you on this book and to help get it out into the public, because it really does garner such deep thinking about how we do need to approach student engagement in the classroom. It looks like we have another question or comment. Laura says, am I showing them every day what they do matters? That is key. Being consistent in the relationship with students, letting them know that they are seen, heard, and have value in the community. Megan, would you consider presenting at FLAG or other world language conferences?
Yep, it's definitely something I've thought about. I'm in the middle of pursuing my doctorate right now. So between that and the book, it's a full day. But it's on the horizon. And I think now that I have a book in my hands that I can show up to at those conferences for the people that want to go deeper, I think that's definitely on my to-do list.
Excellent. Ron says, I just want to say congratulations. This is wonderful. Can't wait to read your book.
Thank you. I'm excited for that too.
We are so excited. And that's a great lead-in or segue to the fact that the book will be available next week on the 13th. You can find it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your favorite online retailer. It will also be available on our Tandem Light Press website, which is tandemlightpress.com/Megan-King. She has her own page on our site. And you can also find it on Megan's website, which is I'm done with the day, apparently. I can't speak. MWL Classroom by Design.com. So please go out and buy it, share it with your friends, tell your networks. This is such an amazingly valuable tool, I think, for teachers to have in their toolkit, as someone else mentioned earlier. And we really hope that you guys get a lot out of this, and that you are willing and able to share it with your network. Let's see, Melanie Lee, this is from Melanie through Lee, asks, how applicable is it upon first read to other subjects?
Honestly, Mel, I think it's very applicable. So in world language, the idea of proficiency is how much can you apply and use in practice to communicate your message. And while that looks different in different content areas, the ways to build proficiency, the kinds of practices that you have to do individually and with others, are the kinds of activities that you can adapt to lots of different content areas. So I would definitely encourage you to get it and think about what that might look like for you. And I would say, especially in the core subject areas like math, science, social studies, English, that you're likely to find other people doing philosophy of design and working on the work that may be good models for you. But I think as a starting point, my book might be a way for you to kind of speak the language of design in a fairly easily digestible fashion, and sort of say, okay, how might that look for me, and or how might that be useful for me?
Lee says she's fired up to get and read the book.
I can help you with that.
Do we have any other questions before we close out? You guys have been wonderful and amazing and attentive today, and we are so grateful that you've joined us. Megan, do you have any final words? And I'll ask you too, Dr. McCammon, if you have anything final you want to mention as we wait just to see if there's any other questions that come in, but I'd love to leave the final word with you guys.
Well, I am so excited to see everybody here, and I'm grateful to you, Caroline, and to you, Steve, for joining me in conversation about this today and over the coming weeks, months, years. I'm going to add to what Caroline said about how to find me. I'm on all of the major social media sites, and my website, MWL, for like Modern World Language, classroombydesign.com, will give you a little taste of the book. You can kind of get a sample and read a little bit about how it's written, what kind of message there is. There'll be how to get in touch with me if you're looking for more information about who I am and what I do. And if you're looking to reach out on social media or get connected to my messaging, I also host a blog there. So if any of those are of interest to you, join me and find out.
The only thing I would add is if you want to learn more about the Schlechty Center and about the work we're doing with design, not only helping teachers design engaging work for kids, but helping we design work for adults, and we help principals and central office and superintendents and board members think about how they can design engagement focused schools. Megan mentioned, she's mentioned a couple times this notion of working on the work. And for the few of you who may not be familiar with that, I think it may be a good way to end why design is important. Our founder talked about the fact that it ought not be about fixing teachers and students. It ought to be about the work. And so he said, let's not work on the teacher. Let's not work on the student. Let's work on the work. And what Megan has written, it's one thing to say, let's work on the work. It's one thing to say, let's not focus on test scores. It's one thing to say, kids aren't broken and teachers aren't broken. But when you say, let's work on the work, then you really have to get serious about how might we do that. And I think what Megan's written is a really practical way for people to take those, our design qualities, and really put them into practice, so that it's not just, hey, let's focus on the work. Let's really talk about how that might look. I think it's important. And like I told you, Megan, we'll be purchasing the first several copies, and your friends and colleagues are really excited for you. Thanks for the opportunity to share a few thoughts today.
We are honored to have both of you with us. Go ahead.
To extend a little bit on what Mr. McCammon has said. So there's the Schlechty Center for individual teachers has lots of information about the philosophy of design and what we talked about with working on the work. But on a more system level, Leading for Learning and other works by the Schlechty Center and by Phil Schlechty have helped me extend those same ideas from not just my classroom to my system to my community. And so if this has piqued your interest, that would definitely be a direction to follow.
Megan's book first, and then those as more influential reading, I think. But no, your book, I do think, really is a good jumping off point for a lot of these different conversations that teachers can be having internally and also amongst themselves within their own networking of teaching and the disciplines that they teach in. All right. We have a link. Thank you, Lee. I think you posted the link to Megan's book in the chat. You can go pre-order it. It will not ship and be delivered to you until after the 13th or on the 13th and after. But please go ahead and do that. We are so excited and so thrilled to see what happens with this book and with you in the coming months, years, etc. And I hope you'll keep all of us posted. Megan has a beautiful newsletter that I'm sure you can also sign up for on her website. And her design, not just the design in the classroom, but also her designs of aesthetics are very beautiful. So keep that in mind as well, so you can keep up with her and what she's doing. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you both for being here and having this conversation with us. We're so excited, and we're just glad you joined us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Carolyn. This was wonderful. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome. You had about 15 total. So that's great.
Good start.
Yeah.